Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we cut through the noise, sift through the sources, and give you the real story behind the headlines. Today we're taking a magnifying glass to something absolutely fundamental to how our country runs. We're not talking about the latest political gossip or who's up or down in the polls. This deep dive is about the very machinery of our democracy, the elections that determine our leaders, the economic truths that shape our lives, and the legal systems designed to hold everyone accountable, from the smallest citizen to the most powerful. You've heard the buzzwords, right? Election integrity, voter fraud, protect the vote. They're everywhere, saturating our news feeds and political discourse. But here's the crucial insight we're going to unpack today. Sometimes, the very people shouting those phrases the loudest are actually the ones actively weakening the system they claim to be protecting. We're diving deep into actions and patterns that appear to systematically undermine trust and functionality within core American institutions, as meticulously detailed in the sources we've explored. What's particularly striking is the brazenness of some of these actions, prompting the unsettling question of whether those behind them truly believe they can succeed without meaningful intervention.
Precisely. And what's compelling about the sources we've gathered is their breadth. We're drawing from a range of detailed reports that illuminate these patterns across several critical domains. From the nuanced processes of our elections to the very integrity of our economic data, and even high-profile legal cases that expose deeper issues of power, influence, and accountability. Over the next 20 to 30 minutes, we're going to meticulously unpack the strategic thinking behind these actions, dissect the specific mechanisms used, and, perhaps most importantly, translate what it all means for you, the listener, as you navigate a world increasingly awash in information and competing narratives.
Okay, let's begin that journey. Let's unpack this first big theme, the deliberate undermining of the safeguards of election integrity. Our sources detail a strategy that began subtly, but has become increasingly overt, painting a clear picture of a system under pressure.
Yeah, there was this initial shift documented beginning around 2017, which reveals a gradual, almost imperceptible displacement of experienced boundaries respecting officials within various government agencies. These weren't political firebrands. These were often career civil servants, experts in their fields, technocrats, economists, statisticians, election administrators. Individuals who understood the intricate details of their roles, respected established procedures, and frequently had served across multiple administrations, both Republican and Democratic. They represented the institutional memory and the objective guardrails of government, the people who make the actual gears of the state turn without personal agenda.
And what's striking, according to our sources, is that their replacements weren't chosen for their policy expertise, their years of experience in complex administrative roles, or their deep understanding of, say, election law. The new overriding qualification for gaining access to the inner circles, particularly under the Trump administration, became simple, unquestioning loyalty.
That was it.
It was the sole paramount criterion.
Indeed. We're talking about individuals who stepped into critical government roles, whose primary credentials were often derived from public allegiance to the leader, or more specifically, from their willingness to deny the outcome of the 2020 election. The sources explicitly mention a cadre of right-wing podcasters, various Fox News personalities, and self-styled election warriors who built their public profiles on the rigged election narrative. Many of these individuals had absolutely no prior governing experience, no professional background in the complex fields they were suddenly tasked with overseeing, whether it was cybersecurity, infrastructure, or the nuances of election administration. Their appointment wasn't about upholding institutional norms or ensuring efficient government. It was about guaranteeing that no one in the room would ever challenge the leader's directives or present inconvenient facts.
So if you systematically remove those voices, those experienced hands, those objective experts, what's the fundamental consequence? Our sources describe it starkly as removing the last brakes on the system. You create what one report vividly terms an all-gas, no-brakes scenario, where the machinery of government is driven solely by the leader's desires, unchecked by expertise, institutional memory, or traditional ethical boundaries.
That's the fear.
This isn't just a theoretical concern. It's a blueprint for unchecked power.
Precisely. And once those institutional guardrails were sufficiently weakened or removed, the next calculated step, as our sources meticulously detail, was to directly undermine or dismantle the very agencies designed to keep our elections safe and secure. Consider the case of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA.
CISA.
Okay. This is a critical federal agency specifically created to protect the nation's infrastructure, including election systems, from cyber threats. After the 2020 election, CISA, composed of nonpartisan cybersecurity experts, made a very clear and unequivocal statement. They declared the 2020 election the most secure in American history.
And for anyone actively pushing a narrative of a rigged election, that definitive statement from CISA was incredibly problematic.
Hugely problematic.
It directly contradicted and discredited their core story. So, what happened to CISA when it presented that inconvenient truth? How did the system respond?
Well, the sources outline a deliberate campaign against CISA. The agency was consequently sidelined, hollowed out, and its influence gutted. This wasn't a natural bureaucratic shift. It began with verbal attacks from the executive branch questioning CISA's credibility, escalated to reported attempts to control its public messaging, and then it culminated in the high-profile firing of its director, Chris Krebs, who had publicly defended the election's security. This sent a clear, chilling message throughout the federal bureaucracy. Inconvenient truths would not be tolerated, and the agency designed to protect the very infrastructure of democracy was itself vulnerable to political assault.
So the message was basically, fall in line or you're out.
Pretty much. And beyond the federal level, we then observe the systematic targeting of state election control. This is a critical point that many people might not fully grasp. The U.S. Constitution explicitly grants states, not the federal government, the primary authority over elections.
Right.
States decide the rules, the timelines, the specific types of machines used, the design of ballots, and all the intricate procedural details.
So even in federal elections, the presidential election, for instance, it's the states that are largely calling the shots, designing the playbooks. Yet our sources indicate that Donald Trump and his allies attempted to circumvent this constitutional division of power through executive orders and various pressure campaigns. What exactly was the objective in trying to get states to hand over sensitive voter data?
The aim was to compel states, particularly those with sympathetic governors and secretaries of state, to hand over highly sensitive voter data. We're not just talking about publicly available names and addresses. This included private information, potentially details that could be used for challenging legitimate voter registrations en masse, or launching highly targeted voter suppression campaigns, or seeding pervasive doubt in legitimate election results.
So using the data to undermine the system itself.
Potentially, yes. The sources detail how some states, upholding their constitutional duties, commendably refused outright to comply with these requests, recognizing them as an overreach. However, others, frequently red states with aligned leadership, played along providing this data. This represents a remarkable departure from established norms, witnessing the federal executive branch poking around in territory it had no business touching, thereby blurring crucial jurisdictional lines and setting a dangerous precedent for future administration.
And it gets even more concerning when you look at the human element of elections. Our sources highlight a deliberate and focused shift to pressure local election officials. These aren't the political celebrities you see on cable news. They're your county clerks, your supervisors of elections, your local election boards. They're typically non-political figures, often serving for decades, but they hold enormous, quiet power over how votes are actually counted and verified in communities across the country.
They're the frontline guardians.
Exactly. The frontline guardians of the ballot box.
That's absolutely right. And if these local officials demonstrated any unwillingness to cooperate with a predetermined narrative or to facilitate changes outside established procedures, they were subjected to intense pressure campaigns. Our sources document a relentless barrage of tactics. Constant phone calls, often anonymous or from shadowy groups, outright threats to their safety and careers, and even frivolous lawsuits designed to drain their resources and intimidate them into compliance.
Really nasty stuff.
Yes. The reports mention high-profile names like Stephen Miller involved in orchestrating some of these campaigns, alongside a network of behind-the-scenes operatives who often worked out of public view, making their efforts harder to trace but no less effective.
So the pressure comes from both visible figures and hidden actors, creating a suffocating environment for these local officials. But what's the ultimate overarching goal here? What do these pervasive and often aggressive tactics aim to achieve at the grassroots level?
The objective is always the same: to gain access to the machinery of voting and the data that runs it. The underlying strategy, as revealed in the sources, is chillingly explicit. If they can't run elections the old-fashioned way, by persuading more voters, they'll change the rules of the game.
Wow, that's blunt.
It represents a profound and alarming shift from traditional democratic engagement, which relies on public persuasion and voter turnout, to a calculated focus on procedural manipulation and strategic control over the electoral infrastructure itself. It's an attempt to circumvent the will of the voters by altering the rules of engagement.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, a bit unsettling in its cynicism. Our sources point out the classic accuse your opponent tactic at play here, used with a remarkable degree of brazenness. The very same individuals and groups who are loudly, consistently, and without evidence crying election fraud are simultaneously, as our sources detail, actively undermining public trust in the electoral process.
It's a paradox.
It's a striking paradox, but it's a classic strategy to accuse your opponent of doing exactly what you're doing yourself.
And this tactic is surprisingly, disturbingly effective. Our sources explain that it muddies the waters, creating a pervasive fog of uncertainty. It confuses people, making them fundamentally unsure of whom to trust: the official election bodies, the media, or the persistent voices claiming fraud.
Right, so you don't know what to believe.
Exactly. When there's a general widespread sense of doubt and suspicion about the electoral process, it becomes significantly easier for unseen, often subtle changes to be slipped in without widespread public resistance or even awareness. This isn't just a clever political maneuver. Our sources highlight it as a deeply ingrained psychological warfare tactic against the electorate. By mirroring the accusation, it doesn't just muddy the waters, it actively erodes the very concept of objective truth for the average listener.
It forces people to pick a side almost.
It forces people into a position of choosing who to believe, rather than evaluating facts, creating a fertile ground where facts become irrelevant and trust in any institution crumbles, making unseen changes far easier to implement.
Thankfully, despite the sustained pressure, there has been significant pushback. It's crucial to remember this isn't a one-sided fight where these efforts always succeed. Our sources mention specific, documented examples of resistance, like the numerous lawsuits filed by vigilant organizations such as Democracy Forward and the ACLU, which have consistently challenged these attempts to undermine election integrity.
Good to hear.
We've also seen robust interventions by various state attorneys general, many of whom have proactively defended their state's election laws. And importantly, court rulings have repeatedly reinforced established legal boundaries, reminding these actors that there are lines you simply cannot cross in the pursuit of political advantage.
However, this isn't a battle that has been decisively won. Our sources describe it as a constant fight, a continuous, evolving struggle. Every time one scheme is successfully blocked, another pops up somewhere else, often with a slightly different approach or in a different jurisdiction.
It's like whack-a-mole.
Kind of, yeah. The individuals and organizations driving these efforts exhibit an incredible degree of patience and a long-term strategic vision. They're not just thinking about the next election cycle, but years down the road, aiming to incrementally reshape the entire electoral landscape. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and requires sustained vigilance.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now, as we head into another election season? What actionable steps can be taken to safeguard the integrity of your vote and the broader system? Our sources really emphasize the importance of engaging before Election Day, not just on it. You can contact your local election officials, your county clerk, your election supervisor, and ask them directly about your state's specific voting procedures.
That's a great point.
Find out how ballots are counted, what machines are used, what security measures are in place to prevent tampering, and how results are verified.
Absolutely. Supporting these officials publicly is crucial. They are often dedicated non-political figures, frequently working under immense pressure, and even facing threats for simply doing their jobs according to law. Knowing that their community has their back, that citizens understand and appreciate their work, can make a significant difference when external threats and challenges inevitably start rolling in.
Yeah, showing support helps.
And of course, staying informed is paramount. The more you understand about how elections actually work, the verifiable facts and established procedures, the harder it is for anyone to mislead you with false narratives or to sow seeds of doubt. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge to protect the integrity of your own vote and, by extension, the democratic system itself.
That's an excellent point, and it leads us directly into our next big theme, the deliberate undermining of economic truth and institutional credibility. And here, the example that jumps out immediately from our sources is the firing of the federal government's top statistician. This isn't just about a single person. It's about the sanctity of objective data.
The sheer audacity of this event is truly remarkable. Our sources detail how Donald Trump summarily fired the federal government's top statistician, the individual specifically responsible for overseeing America's jobs data and the entire Bureau of Labor Statistics.
BLS, right?
Yeah. Right. The explicit reason, as clearly stated in the reports, was simply that he didn't like the number she reported. This wasn't a methodological dispute, an internal review process, or a call for reevaluation. It was a direct dismissal based purely on the political inconvenience of objective facts.
And this wasn't just some politically appointed crony who could be easily replaced. Our sources really emphasize her distinguished background. She was a nonpartisan career economist, known for her meticulous attention to data integrity and her unwavering independence. Respected across administration.
Exactly. Respected unanimously across multiple administrations, both Republican and Democratic, for her commitment to objective truth. She even received overwhelming bipartisan Senate confirmation, 86-8, which is practically unheard of for any nominee in today's deeply polarized political climate.
86-8, wow.
Yeah, this was someone truly dedicated to objective data, removed solely for the numbers she reported.
So what were the numbers he didn't like?
The numbers that Trump found so unpalatable were indeed unflattering to his administration's economic narrative. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, had released jobs reports showing that job creation under his economy was significantly lower than his often grandiose claims. For instance, in May and June of that year, Trump had publicly touted figures suggesting 258,000 more jobs than reality actually showed. The actual reported figures were meager. 19,000 jobs created in June and only 14,000 in May.
That's a huge difference.
A massive difference. The July numbers also showed a meager 75,000, which was even likely to be revised lower in subsequent reports. The Trump boom was, as one source wryly puts it, more like a Trump puff a little smoke, no fire, indicating a significant disconnect between rhetoric and economic reality.
And this isn't just about one statistician or one jobs report, is it? The Bureau of Labor Statistics is globally reviewed.
It's considered the platinum standard.
The platinum standard for economic data worldwide. Stock markets, central banks, and governments across the globe rely on their reports for accurate, unbiased information to make critical investment and policy decisions. So, if you actively undermine or manipulate that data, you're not just changing a few headlines or spinning a political message.
No, you're shaking the very foundation of global trust in America's economic credibility. Our sources draw stark parallels to actions taken by dictators and authoritarian regimes, who routinely fire statisticians for releasing unflattering data, leading inevitably to lost investor confidence, market jitters, and a general loss of faith in the country's economic transparency.
It sends a message, doesn't it?
Indeed. An important aspect to consider here is the chilling, pervasive message this sends to every other government servant, every other professional across the federal bureaucracy who is dedicated to objective facts and data. It tells them unequivocally that if their data, their objective findings, or their expert analysis contradicts the prevailing political line or the desired narrative, their career might very well be summarily terminated.
Creates a climate of fear.
Absolutely. This isn't just detrimental to the morale and independence of public servants. It's profoundly damaging to all of us because it undermines our collective ability to rely on our own government's numbers for accurate, truthful information about the economy, public health, or any other critical domain. It creates a culture of self-censorship and fear.
And if this specific pattern of behavior, attacking objective sources when they deliver inconvenient truths, feels remarkably familiar, it's because our sources highlight a clear, disturbing consistency in Donald Trump's actions throughout his tenure. When COVID numbers didn't look good for his administration, he publicly attacked public health officials like Dr. Anthony Fauci, sidelining their expertise.
Right, I remember that.
When election results didn't go his way, he immediately called the entire vote rigged, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And when Fed Chair Jerome Powell refused to cut interest rates at his personal behest, Trump publicly, repeatedly, and aggressively bashed him.
This really summarizes what our sources identify as the core playbook, a consistent strategy. If reality doesn't match the narrative, change reality, or at least convince enough people that reality is wrong.
Bend the facts.
It's an attempt to bend facts to fit a political agenda, rather than adjust the agenda to fit the facts. And it's also worth noting, as our sources point out, a recurring demographic pattern. A disproportionate number of the individuals on the receiving end of these high-profile firings, public attacks, and intense pressure campaigns have been women in positions of significant authority.
Interesting observation. Legally speaking, could he fire her, this top statistician?
Well, our sources confirm that, unfortunately, due to certain specific position protections, the president does have the authority to remove some appointed officials without cause.
Oh.
But, as they also critically note, legal doesn't mean right. Regardless of its strict legality, it sends an incredibly damaging message about the value placed on truth, objectivity, and independent expertise within the government, undermining the very principles of good governance.
Now, let's look at some other instances of this broader pattern in economic policies and narrative control. Our sources highlight what they somewhat ironically call Trump's war on the American auto industry. It's ironic because he consistently positioned himself as a champion of American manufacturing and the Rust Belt.
Yeah, the striking aspect here is the direct negative impact of Trump's tariffs, despite Ford Motor Company, for example, building around 80% of its cars right here in the U.S.
Which is a lot.
It is, but a substantial portion of essential parts still come from a global supply chain, including Canada, Mexico, various Asian countries, and China. Under Trump's tariff plan, these imported parts were hit with fees as high as 35%.
35%, that's huge.
Huge. The predictable economic consequence of such steep tariffs is that the costs for manufacturers skyrocket. This leaves companies with a difficult choice. They either have to significantly raise prices for consumers, thereby reducing demand, or they must slash jobs to cut costs, or often a combination of both. It's not complex economic theory, it's simple, observable cause and effect on manufacturing.
And the irony is truly palpable, isn't it? Trump campaigned extensively as a savior of Rust Belt jobs, promising to bring manufacturing back to America. Yet his own policies, as documented in these reports, appear to directly undermine its core industry, leading to precisely the opposite outcomes of what he promised.
Exactly. The sources mention Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan making direct public pleas to the administration, emphatically stating that these tariffs were killing our manufacturers and harming American workers, not protecting them.
So the policy backfired.
It's a clear example of how policies intended to protect can, in fact, inflict significant economic harm.
Okay, another example from the sources is this tactic of distraction, right? Something called the Pelosi diversion.
Yes, another compelling example of narrative control and distraction. After Paul Pelosi, the husband of then-Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was brutally attacked in their home, Trump and his allies immediately shifted focus. They launched a campaign of unfounded accusations about the Pelosi family's finances, specifically accusing them of questionable stock market gains without presenting a shred of verifiable evidence.
Just throwing accusations out there.
Pretty much. What's particularly revealing here is the staggering contrast this provides.
Exactly. While Trump was busy throwing speculative shade and making baseless accusations against the Pelosi's, our sources meticulously detail how he allegedly doubled his own net worth since first taking office.
Doubled it.
That's what the reports claim. They painstakingly document how he leveraged the presidency itself for personal financial gain, holding official events that strategically promoted his private businesses, securing massive foreign investments and direct payments from countries explicitly looking to curry favor.
Using the office for gain.
And even pushing crypto ventures with a platform and influence only a head of state could command. If anyone truly monetized political power to an unprecedented level, it was Trump. Yet he consistently used the tactic of accusing others of the very financial impropriety he was allegedly engaged in himself.
It's a staggering double standard.
A staggering, undeniable double standard presented in the sources.
And this pattern of cherry-picking data, or what some might call changing the scoreboard, is a recurring, deeply ingrained theme. The sources describe an incident where Trump hosted an economist from the Conservative Heritage Foundation. This economist proceeded to present data, supposedly from the BLS, to argue that President Biden's job numbers were misleading and inflated.
Okay.
The ironic twist, however, was that the very charts and figures used by this economist to make his case actually came directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the very same institution they were simultaneously accusing of bias and providing false data.
So they used the data from the agency they were attacking.
Precisely. It's akin to complaining vociferously about a referee's call while using his own whistle to make your point. It fundamentally undermines the credibility of the argument.
And it's important for our listeners to understand that job revisions, like those mentioned, are a completely normal and routine part of how the labor market is measured under all administrations, regardless of political party.
That's a key point.
These revisions are part of a continuous process of collecting more complete data. Independent analysts and economic experts have consistently shown that, overall, these revisions have become more accurate over time, not less, reflecting an ongoing effort to refine statistical methodologies.
What's truly revealing here is the selective outrage. If the job numbers or any economic data point happen to look unfavorable for Trump, suddenly the BLS was deemed corrupt, biased, or intentionally misleading.
But if the numbers looked good,
Yet if those same numbers happened to look good, there wasn't a single complaint. The BLS's integrity was then implicitly accepted. It's a clear, consistent pattern of validating data only when it conveniently supports a predetermined political narrative and aggressively attacking it when it doesn't.
convenient truth.
This kind of transactional relationship with truth profoundly damages the public's ability to trust any official information.
So when you put all these economic pieces together, the firing of statisticians, the impact of tariffs, the diversions, the cherry-picking of data, what's the broader economic reality being presented in our sources for the general public?
Well, the picture painted is not great. We're talking about an economy where GDP is sliding backwards, prices are persistently rising, and job growth is barely sputtering along, if at all. This combination is precisely what economists describe as a recipe for stagflation, a toxic mix of slow or negative growth coupled with high inflation.
Stagflation. And this is an abstract economic theory. It has a direct, tangible impact on you, the listener, in your everyday life.
Absolutely. It connects directly to your real-world experience at the grocery store, at the gas pump. Our sources highlight that going to the grocery store today and buying the exact same basket of goods you bought just last year means you'll be short about 3% of your purchasing power.
3% less buying power. Ouch!
That's money that has simply vanished from your wallet due to inflation, making essentials more expensive. Similarly, gas prices aren't the fantasy $1.98 that some political ads might pretend. They're consistently closer to $3.75 or even higher in many places across the country.
Reality check on gas prices.
These are not just statistics, they are direct assaults on household budgets.
And to provide broader historical context, our sources note that for decades, the data has shown a clear, statistically significant pattern. Democratic presidents, on average, consistently create more jobs than Republican ones.
Is that right?
This isn't a matter of opinion or political spin. It's simply a matter of historical arithmetic, citing compelling examples from President Kennedy to President Clinton to President Obama and to President Biden, whose cumulative job creation records consistently outpace those of Republican presidents like Reagan, both Bush administrations, and Trump by a wide margin.
So what we're ultimately left with is a conclusion that frames Trump's actions not as fiscal conservatism or sound economic management, but as economic vandalism.
Economic vandalism. Strong words.
It's compared to a bad business deal where the public, the American taxpayers, and consumers are ultimately left holding the bag, bearing the costs of short-sighted or politically motivated decisions. This pattern fundamentally undermines Americans' ability to make truly informed decisions, whether it's in the voting booth when evaluating economic platforms or simply at the checkout counter when trying to manage their household finances. Without reliable data, rational decision-making becomes impossible.
Okay, let's shift gears now to our third major theme, the undermining of legal processes and public trust, specifically through the deeply unsettling lens of the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell saga. First, for those who might need a quick refresher, who were these individuals and what were their roles?
Right. Jeffrey Epstein was a deeply controversial figure, a wealthy financier who was convicted of sex offenses and arrested on new sex trafficking charges before his death in prison. Ghislaine Maxwell was his longtime associate and partner who was herself convicted of sex trafficking charges and is currently serving a decades-long sentence in federal prison. For years, there has been widespread, almost mythic talk of a mysterious Epstein client list, a fabled document that supposedly contained the names of powerful individuals involved in his illicit activities.
The infamous list.
Exactly. It's crucial to clarify, as our sources strongly emphasize, that the fabled client list doesn't actually exist in the way many people imagine a single, incriminating roster. What do exist are vast, extensive files, meticulously maintained flight logs from Epstein's private jets, and numerous case documents, some sealed, some heavily redacted, containing a mix of names, verified victims, known associates, employees, and even random people who merely crossed paths with Epstein socially or professionally.
So it's more like a collection of documents, not one list.
Precisely. And here's the absolutely crucial distinction, one that often gets completely bulldozed in the whirlwind of conspiracy theories and social media speculation.
Yeah.
Just because someone's name appears in a file on a flight log or in a deposition doesn't automatically mean they committed a crime, were involved in any wrongdoing, or were even aware of Epstein's criminal enterprise.
That's a huge caveat.
It is. That's a fundamental legal and factual principle that is consistently ignored or distorted in the swirl of speculation surrounding this case.
Okay, so a name doesn't equal guilt. What about the promises to release these files?
Yes, a compelling point here is the pattern of unfulfilled promises of disclosure. Back when Donald Trump first took office, his political allies, prominent figures like Kash Patel and right-wing media personality Dan Bongino, loudly and repeatedly promised to expose the truth and reveal the so-called Epstein files. This narrative played directly into a widespread conspiracy theory, popular with a certain political base, suggesting a grand Democratic conspiracy involving prominent liberal figures and a cover-up of their alleged involvement with Epstein.
The big reveal they promised. But fast forward to the current reality, and our sources show a significant, almost comical pivot from those initial dramatic promises.
Comical is one word for it.
In a recent court filing, the current administration, despite the previous hype, openly admitted that even if they manage to acquire those grand jury records, which are incredibly difficult to unseal, they fully intend to heavily redact the names of uncharged third parties before making them public.
So, redactions. Lots of black ink.
Basically, yes. This is a standard legal and ethical practice.
This is indeed standard legal rationale, and for very good reason. It's meant to protect the privacy of victims, safeguard sensitive investigative details, and crucially, avoid unfairly smearing innocent people who were never accused of wrongdoing or involved in Epstein's crimes simply because their name appeared tangentially in a document.
Makes sense legally.
However, politically, for the Magier base that was promised a bombshell, this is absolute dynamite. They were not looking for a sanitized, legally safe version of events. They've been explicitly promised a big reveal of Democratic names, a massive drop of Democratic dirt.
And they're not getting it.
The reality of a heavily redacted PDF upholding legal norms is simply not going to fulfill that expectation. As one source bluntly puts it, delivering what was promised is legally impossible and politically suicidal, and now that promise has been openly abandoned by those who made it.
And there's an interesting personal incentive for Trump here, isn't there? His own name might be in there.
Our sources note that his own name reportedly appears in the Epstein files, not due to any alleged criminal involvement, but because he knew Epstein socially for years, having been photographed with him and having associated in circles.
So just an association, not an accusation.
According to the sources, yes. This fact provides a very clear personal motive to keep any such information, no matter how innocuous for him, sealed from public view.
Interesting. What about the legal hurdles?
Absolutely. The legal roadblocks to releasing grand jury transcripts are incredibly strong by design. Grand jury secrecy rules are among the toughest and most sacrosanct in American law, specifically to protect the integrity of investigations and the privacy of those involved. In Florida, for example, a federal judge has already unequivocally shut down similar requests for unsealing. While New York state law allows for slightly more wiggle room, getting these transcripts unsealed is still an incredibly difficult legal battle to win.
So it was never really likely to happen anyway?
So the initial promise of this comprehensive, unredacted list of prominent figures was, in many ways, a political fantasy from the start, a narrative built on an unrealistic legal premise.
Now let's talk about what our sources describe as the imminent Maxwell pardon, a political thriller. This is where the story takes a truly shocking and unprecedented turn, starting with a mysterious 9-hour prison interview involving Trump's lawyer.
Yes. Our sources detail an extraordinary event. Trump's top criminal defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, spent 9 hours interviewing Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted child sex trafficker inside a federal prison.
9 hours, that's a long time.
A very long time. And this wasn't just a casual chat. The entire lengthy exchange was meticulously recorded on both video and audio. The purpose, as our sources explain, was remarkably transparent. It was not for legal defense or to uncover new evidence against her. It was explicitly for character vouching, to provide a pre-packaged PR campaign.
Pre-packaged PR, how so?
Maxwell's role in this interview was to state, on camera and audio, that Trump was never on the plane, didn't like young girls, and wasn't close to Epstein. The understanding was that this selectively curated footage would only be released to the public if it perfectly served Trump's narrative and helped distance him from the Epstein scandal.
So if Maxwell had hinted at anything, even subtly, that might reflect poorly on Trump or implicate him in any way, that video would have been buried instantly under the guise of protecting victims or ongoing investigations.
Exactly. Total control over the narrative. But then it gets even more jaw-dropping with what's been referred to as the Queen for a Day deal.
Queen for a day, what's that?
This is truly unheard of, as the source notes, and raises significant red flags. Before Blanche even stepped into the prison for that interview, Maxwell's lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, reportedly initiated a proffer call, essentially, an offer to provide information in exchange for a deal or immunity. And in this call, Maxwell was granted an unheard-of immunity agreement by Trump's own legal team, a private deal with a then-sitting president's personal lawyers.
Immunity. For Maxwell, from Trump's lawyers.
That's what the sources claim. To offer immunity to a convicted child sex trafficker and an individual linked to such a vast, heinous network of abuse by a sitting president's lawyer is, by all accounts, an extraordinary, deeply troubling, and unprecedented move in American jurisprudence.
Sounds like it.
It hints at a quid pro quo that should alarm anyone concerned with justice.
And within mere days of that 9-hour interview and the alleged immunity deal, Maxwell received a significant, immediate upgrade in her prison conditions.
Oh, really?
She was rapidly transferred from a minimum security prison to what's been described by some as essentially the summer camp of the federal prison system, a notoriously low-security facility in Texas, far more comfortable and less restricted.
A reward, maybe?
This swift transfer, our sources assert, was not a coincidence. It is described as a clear reward or a down payment on a much larger prize. A full presidential pardon.
What's particularly revealing here is Trump's subsequent public claim that this rapid transfer was not unusual.
But it was unusual.
Our sources explicitly state that this is demonstrably false. Such a swift transfer for someone convicted of her crimes, particularly a high-profile convicted sex trafficker, is extremely unusual and directly against standard Bureau of Prisons policy. This immediate and preferential treatment following an unusual interview and immunity offer immediately raises serious questions about whether this was indeed a transactional move, a clear benefit granted in exchange for certain assurances or future considerations.
And here's the unexpected twist in this unfolding political thriller. Our sources indicate that some within Trump's own MAG camp are reportedly trying to actively dissuade him from following through on a pardon for Maxwell.
Really? Why?
Not out of any sudden moral outrage or ethical conversion, but because they're deeply worried about the massive political suicide risk it poses in a general election. Imagine the Democratic campaign ads starkly proclaiming the GOP pardons child sex traffickers.
Oof. Yeah, that would be bad.
That's a devastating, emotionally charged line that would undoubtedly stick and prove incredibly difficult to counter with any degree of political dexterity.
A critical aspect that ties into this legal maneuvering is what our sources describe as congressional interference, a calculated Epstein files distraction game. James Comer, the head of the powerful House Oversight Committee, subpoenaed a set of cherry-picked Epstein files.
Cherry-picked.
What's revealing is that this demand was strategically mixed in with demands for unrelated information on figures like Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and Robert Mueller. This is clearly identified as a classic bait-and-switch maneuver aimed at potentially negotiating away or trading off truly damaging files related to Epstein in exchange for political concessions or to deflect attention.
Tradie files, essentially.
Potentially. Furthermore, Comer notably backed off taking Maxwell's congressional deposition, citing her Supreme Court appeal, which, it's vital to understand, isn't about her innocence or the merits of her trafficking conviction, but rather a narrow, decades-old immunity deal that Epstein had negotiated for himself 15 years prior.
So the appeal isn't even about the core crimes.
Exactly. And while all this high-stakes political and legal maneuvering is unfolding, Maxwell's legal team is concurrently working overtime on a highly orchestrated PR makeover.
A PR makeover for Maxwell.
Their strategy, as detailed in our sources, is to try and recast her public image as a scapegoat, a victim unfairly bearing the brunt of Epstein's crimes, all with the clear goal of softening public opinion ahead of a potential pardon. This PR push connects directly to her desperate legal fight against releasing grand jury records, which reportedly contain really bad evidence summaries of abuse involving potentially 1,000 victims.
1,000 victims.
That's the potential number mentioned. If those summaries were to become public, her carefully crafted victim narrative would instantly go up in smoke, revealing the full extent of her alleged complicity.
Okay, so this leads to what you call the Frankenstein problem.
This brings us to what we can aptly call the Frankenstein problem. The political hype and exaggerated claims around the mythical Epstein list created a monstrous public expectation. That monster, our sources suggest, now turns on you when it becomes evident that the promised, unredacted bombshell cannot be legally or practically fulfilled.
The hype backfires.
Trump and his allies, realizing they can't deliver on their over-the-top promises, are now engaging in a strategic blame shift. They're letting the courts be the bad guy, publicly blaming unelected elites in black robes when they can't deliver the promised unredacted files.
As the sources succinctly put it, it's a classic case of being hoisted with his own petard, literally blown up by your own bomb or undermined by the very scheme you concocted.
A fitting analogy.
But what's the core, profound issue here, beyond the immediate players and the political machinations? What's the broader implication for our democracy?
This isn't just about Ghislaine Maxwell or Jeffrey Epstein. It's about exposing a deeply entrenched network of power, money, and mutual protection. The alarming implication for our entire system of justice is that the American presidency, the highest office in the land, might be leveraged not to uphold justice, but to shield a convicted predator and her powerful associates from accountability.
That's terrifying.
Our sources describe this as nothing less than a five-alarm fire for our democracy, highlighting a profound existential risk to the integrity and impartiality of our justice system, where power and influence might supersede the rule of law. It suggests a chilling pathway for the weaponization of executive authority to protect a privileged few, rather than ensure justice for all.
So we've gone on quite a journey today, dissecting three critical areas where the very foundations of democratic institutions appear to be under relentless attack. We've seen a remarkably consistent pattern emerge. Deliberate efforts to undermine institutions, whether it's the integrity of elections, the objectivity of economic data, or the accountability of the legal system, all seemingly when their outputs don't align with a desired political narrative.
That's right. It's striking to note how these are not isolated incidents, but deeply connected strategic endeavors. They work in tandem, creating a cumulative effect that systematically erodes public trust.
Yeah, trust is key.
And in doing so, chips away at the very foundation of democratic processes. This deliberate weakening of the institutions that are designed to provide essential checks and balances that offer objective truth and impartial data creates a dangerous vacuum, making society ripe for manipulation and confusion.
So why should you care about these seemingly abstract institutional battles? These actions directly, profoundly impact the credibility of the information you rely on every single day to make decisions for your life. Think about it. The economic data that influences your personal finances, your job prospects, and your purchasing power. The election results that directly determine your voice in government and the leaders who represent you.
Things that affect everyone.
And the fairness and impartiality of the legal system that is supposed to apply equally to everyone, from the most powerful to the most vulnerable. When trust in these fundamental pillars of our society is deliberately eroded, your ability to make informed, rational decisions for yourself, your family, and your community is profoundly compromised.
Given these pervasive patterns of undermining institutions, a crucial question arises for us as informed citizens. What responsibilities do we now have to diligently distinguish between factual, verifiable information and politically motivated narratives? How might our active engagement in this distinction shape the future of accountability in a democracy, ensuring that those in power remain truly beholden to the public good and objective truth?
That's the big question, isn't it?
We encourage you to explore your local election processes, understand how your votes are truly counted, scrutinize the sources of economic data you consume daily, and remain ever vigilant about the perilous intersection of power and justice. Your active engagement, even in seemingly small ways, can make a significant difference in safeguarding these crucial foundational systems for future generations.
That's a powerful thought to leave with and a vital call to action for all of us. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.